Cal Reddin stood behind the county filing desk with a stamp pad under one hand and a stack of transfer papers under the other, and Stella Morrison felt the room tilt, even though she stayed still. Dust from the sale arena still clung to her cuffs. Her palms still smelled like the paint mare's halter, and every person who had dismissed her all morning now watched the clerk's mouth, as if one sentence could set fire to a lifetime. Harlan Pike had already moved closer to the counter, ready to insert himself where cameras and signatures mattered. Mara had her phone out, prepared to film Stella's failure in high resolution. Cal lifted the top page, checked the cashier's confirmation one last time, and spoke toward the man in the worn work jacket who had spent half the day being treated like spare furniture. "Mr. Walsh, the Morrison Ranch deed is ready." Stella heard the name, heard the title in Cal's voice, and every exchange since sunrise rearranged itself in her head with painful precision. The stranger she had covered for, challenged and accused of reckless bidding, was Christopher Walsh, principal of Walsh Land and Cattle, the buyer of the ranch note and deed package for $2,480,000. Harlan's expression collapsed first, not in outrage, in confusion, as if the room had violated a rule he assumed could never be broken. Stella did not speak because she had no safe sentence yet, and the pause stretched long enough for the memory of dawn to rise with perfect clarity. The feed ledger, the reserve board, the lender's white signs, and a wrinkled envelope no one would accept. Before the filing desk, before the Mare, before the sentence that renamed the day, Stella had been in the south barn aisle at Morrison Ranch with a flashlight between her teeth and a clipboard against her hip. Harlan had reassigned 2 hands to higher priority work, which meant she was covering feed checks, water checks, and transport loads herself. And she moved with the practiced economy of someone who did not have enough time to be angry. The ranch covered 1,920 acres, and every acre carried a memory of her father's voice telling her that land was a promise made in slow motion. The promise had become a deadline. In 2019, after drought losses, the ranch had taken an operating loan that looked survivable on paper and punishing in a dry year. Her father had managed each payment through stubborn math and longer days until his death in 2024, when Harlan stepped into control under a temporary management clause that was supposed to stabilize operations and had instead turned daily work into a theater of correction. Spring 2026 arrived with the loan matured unpaid, a balance of $2,310,000, and a lender that had court approval to liquidate secured movable assets first, then close foreclosure in one combined auction day. Harlan used the legal pressure as a private weapon. He never shouted in the way a stranger would recognize as abuse. He preferred public boredom, the flick of a hand, the sentence spoken as if he were discussing weather. "You missed 1 grain count last week, Stella," he said while she loaded tack into the trailer, though she had not missed it. "At this point, the lender should send us flowers for getting rid of you." Mara laughed from the truck gate, polished boots crossed at the ankles, and added, "Try not to cry at the auction. People pay less when they smell desperation." Stella kept tightening straps. The buckle pins slipped once because her fingers were cold, and she redid it without looking up. She had learned where to place pain so it did not interrupt tasks. She saved argument for places where argument could alter an outcome, and there were almost none left under Harlan's authority. By 7:30, the convoy rolled to the county grounds where horse trailers lined both sides of the gravel lot, and the sale ring loudspeaker crackled names of consignors who no longer existed as owners by sundown. Stella checked in the paint mare herself, because no one else handled that mare gently enough. The mare was 6, broad-hipped, white and chestnut, with 1 blue eye and 1 brown, and she had a reserve set at $18,000. At the check-in table, bidders formed a narrow line in front of two clerks and a laminated sign that read, "Bidder deposit. Required. $500. Stella signed consignor forms, turned to head for the warm-up alley, and noticed a man standing half a step out of line while a clerk pushed a wrinkled envelope back toward him with two fingers. He wore a dust-stained jacket, plain hat, and boots that had seen miles, and there was no performance in him, no complaint, no attempt to charm. "Cash from an unverified envelope does not clear," the clerk said, already looking past him to the next bidder. "No deposit, no paddle." The man nodded once and moved aside, and Stella saw the exact thing she recognized in overworked hands all her life, a person calculating whether dignity survived another refusal. He did not ask anyone for help. He stood still long enough that others could pretend he was no longer in their way, then stepped toward the fence line where old sale posters peeled in strips. Stella had 40 tasks left before first call, no spare cash in any practical sense, and Harlan's voice already in her head if he found out she had advanced money to a stranger on foreclosure day. She reached into the envelope pocket inside her jacket, pulled out 5 folded $100 bills she had kept for emergency feed fuel, and crossed the gravel before she could overthink it. She held the bills out, not touching him. "Take this to the clerk," she said. "Give me your name after they issue the paddle. I'll write it down, and you return it by evening." He looked at the money, then at her face as if confirming she understood the cost. "That is not small money," he said. His voice was low and measured. Stella answered, "Neither is standing there while they decide what kind of person you are." She walked him back to the window, set the 5 bills beneath the laminated sign herself, and waited until the clerk stamped his bidder packet and handed over a paddle that had been impossible 5 minutes earlier. When he returned, he passed her the claim stub with his bidder number, written cleanly, and she tucked it into her clipboard sleeve before leading the mare toward warm-up. "You have my word," he said. "I will repay you before I leave." Stella glanced at him once, saw the same controlled stillness, and kept walking. Without that deposit, he could not have entered Lot 12 at all, and the day had already tied her money to his paddle. She told herself she had done a practical thing, not a sentimental one, because practical things were easier to carry. Her practical calm lasted until she checked the updated board and saw rumors turning into risk. Buyers had heard foreclosure meant distress. Distress drew speculators. Speculators chased blood in the water, and blood in the water inflated bids far above feed logic on the wrong lots while crushing others into salvage prices. If the paint mare climbed too high under excitement, every remaining lot in her section would read as leverage against the ranch's immediate obligations. And Harlan would use the spike to justify stripping feed reserves from the working herd for image. She found the stranger near the rails, paddle in hand, studying lot sheets with a pencil. He asked no questions when she approached, just waited. Stella kept her voice level. "You are new to this ring. The paint mare at Lot 12 has a reserve at $18,000. Do not bid her up unless you can close without blinking." His mouth shifted in something almost like amusement. "You are warning me off a horse you consigned." "I am warning you off theatre," she said. "This place punishes people who confuse noise for value." He tucked the pencil behind his ear and looked back toward the gate. "What do you want if I ignore your warning?" She heard herself answer before she had polished the thought. "A bet. If you cannot afford her and stall out above reserve, you leave quietly and stop bidding today. If you buy her clean above reserve, I work your temporary stall line 1 unpaid weekend." He studied her expression for a beat longer than comfort allowed. "Done," he said. "Name?" "Stella Morrison." He gave his own with the same economy. "Chris." She did not ask for more because the announcer called Lot 12, and the ring surged. The bidding opened sharp and climbed in disciplined increments. At $18,000, the reserve threshold passed, and the auctioneer's cadence tightened. Stella tracked each paddle with a handler's eye, identifying professionals, hobby buyers, one dealer who liked to provoke. Chris entered at $19,500 without flourish, dropped out at $21,000, re-entered at $22,500, and never looked at the crowd when counters came. Harlan had edged into the front row and was smiling now because high numbers gave him a stage. Mara whispered to a friend, loud enough for Stella to hear, "Watch her pretend this was strategy." The hammer fell at $24,000 to Chris. Stella exhaled through her nose and accepted the loss without drama because the terms were plain. Chris walked over after settlement and held out her $500 before she could ask. "Debt repaid," he said. Then he added, "You report at 6 Saturday morning to the temporary stalls behind Ring C. If your pride objects, you can call it honoring a contract." She took the bills, folded them once, and put them back in her jacket. "I said I would work," she replied. "I work." By the time the clerk logged the payment, his signed bill of sale had cleared, and the paint mare was led to his temporary stall line behind Ring C, the exact line Stella now owed him for one unpaid weekend. Harlan intercepted her before she reached the tack trailer. "You made a side bet during lender liquidation," he said, voice dry with contempt. "Even your mistakes need an audience." Stella loaded a saddle onto the rack, cinch leather slapping metal. "The mare sold strong. That helps this sheet." Harlan leaned in, smiling for nearby buyers. "Nothing helps with you near it." Mara took a photo of Stella from 3 feet away and said, "Keep that expression, it matches foreclosure." Stella set the second saddle in place, closed the trailer door, and walked to the office tent, because movement was the only answer that did not feed them. By midday, heat settled over the grounds and the office tent filled with lender reps, county clerks, and consigners chasing signatures. Stella needed one corrected inventory page from the far printer bank, and the quickest route took her behind stacked hay pallets near the temporary records room. She heard Harlan before she saw him, his voice lowered in the private tone he used when he believed workers were interchangeable and walls were loyal. Mara answered him between short laughs. Stella froze behind the pallet edge because stepping out would announce eavesdropping she had not chosen. Harlan said, "The insurance check cleared months ago, $190,000. And no, Len does not have the full ledger. I parked it in a bridge account and moved entries under equipment repair. By tomorrow, the default is hers in writing. She handled feed transfers, and the lender never asks who signed what if the books look complete." Mara replied, "You'll pin a $2 million mess on Stella and call it incompetence." Harlan laughed softly. $2,310,000, and yes, she is the easiest story in this county. Stella did not breathe for one full count, then stepped backward the way she had come, knees steady only because shock had not reached them yet. She walked straight to the wash racks where noise-covered expression, set a hose into a bucket she did not need, and let cold water run over her wrist until sensation returned. The default was not just drought and timing, not just market pain and a dead father's unfinished plan. It had been engineered under her hands while she was told she failed. The knowledge came as an injury she could not display, because showing it without evidence would hand Harlan exactly what he wanted, a volatile witness he could dismiss as bitter. She shut off the hose, wiped her face with a clean towel, and went looking for Len Ortiz. Len sat in a folding chair behind the bookkeeping trailer with 3 banker boxes at his feet and a legal pad balanced on one knee. He had served Morrison Ranch for 14 years and had learned survival through silence precise enough to pass for meekness. Stella crouched beside him and spoke as if asking about inventory discrepancies, words neutral for anyone passing. I just heard Harlan tell Mara he hid $190,000 in insurance proceeds in a bridge account under repairs. If someone did that, where would the original trace live? Len's pencil stopped. He did not look surprised, only tired. Primary ledger backups locked in your father's desk cabinet. Key kept in the office safe hook by habit. Harlan moved the hook last winter. She gave him the hesitation that had blocked her for months in one explicit sentence. I could not challenge him without records, and I can get you records if I hand you the cabinet key tonight. Len's eyes lifted to hers for the first time. If you get me the key in 1 hour alone, I can pull copies that survive court. The confession gave him cause to move where caution had kept him still, and he closed his pad as if the decision had already been made. Stella nodded once. The next obstacle was access, because Harlan kept the house office locked when he was away. She stood, thanked Len for a page she never held, and walked back toward the ring because the sales schedule did not care about betrayal. The foreclosure session opened in late afternoon under fluorescent lights in a converted equipment shed, and the atmosphere shifted from horse trade noise to legal finality. The Lenders' Council read terms into a microphone, each paragraph flattening decades of family history into asset classes. Movable assets had been liquidated by court-approved order, proceeds credited, deficiency carried to note disposition. Stella stood along the side wall near Len, hands clasped at waist height so no one saw them shake. Harlan took center row with Mara and nodded at people as if hosting an event. Chris stood 3 rows back, jacket still dusty, expression unchanged from morning. The bidding on the note and deed package moved quickly once serious firms entered. Stella recognized 2 regional groups from paperwork headers, one development consortium, and Chris, still listed on a simple paddle under a short name that gave nothing away. Harlan leaned over to Mara during a pause and whispered with a smile Stella could read by shape alone, the smile of a man who believed outcomes were social, not legal. Offers stepped upward in clean intervals. At $2,420,000, one firm dropped. At $2,450,000, another hesitated, requested a recess, and returned with no increase. Chris raised once at $2,480,000. The room held. No counter came. The auctioneer confirmed 3 times, struck the block, and announced sold, pending immediate fund verification. Stella felt no triumph, only dislocation. She had entered the day fearing faceless transfer, and now face to face she knew only as Chris. A man who had accepted a $500 rescue, bought her paint mare for $24,000 and just taken legal control of the ground under her boots. Harlan's posture changed from confidence to calculation in one visible second. He rose before settlement closed and moved toward the filing desk, likely assuming he could dominate introductions before titles attached. Stella remained where she was because she had learned haste benefited people like him. By the time she reached the county desk corridor, Cal Redden had already completed the first verification checks. Cal had run auctions long enough to spot theatre and long enough to refuse it. He saw Harlan angle toward the buyer packet and stepped in with procedural politeness. "Parties wait behind the rail until recording confirms," he said. Harlan forced a laugh. "I am acting authority for Morrison Operations." Cal did not blink. "Recording confirms authority." Stella stopped 2 paces behind Len, close enough to hear paper shuffle and stamp clicks, far enough to avoid becoming part of Harlan's scene. Then came the sentence that reset everything. "Mr. Walsh, the Morrison Ranch deed is ready." Christopher removed his hat, signed the transfer line with a pen he produced from his own pocket, and passed a folder containing same-day certified funds confirmation from Walsh Land and Cattle. Cal checked signatures, nodded to the county clerk, and extended the recorded copy across the counter. Harlan stared at the letterhead as if language had betrayed him. Mara lowered her phone slowly, screen still lit on a half-recorded clip. Stella read the name on the top page and felt the morning loop close, not by coincidence, by design. Christopher turned towards Stella only after the papers were in hand. His voice stayed low enough to spare her a spectacle. I stayed anonymous because status poisons truth early, and the $500 was the test. You treated me like a person before you thought I could change your life. She had no prepared reply and did not force one. Harlan found his voice first. This is a procedural transfer. Existing management remains until review. Cal, still at the desk, answered without heat. Management clause terminated at foreclosure recording. Operational authority now rests with deed holder. Harlan stepped towards Stella then, choosing her as target when law moved out of reach. Do not stand there like this is your rescue, he said through clenched teeth. You already failed this ranch. Stella held his gaze and said only, I have records you have not seen. She did not elaborate because public corridors were not for strategy, and naming details now would give him time to erase what remained. Christopher looked from one to the other, read enough, and asked Stella, Can you meet me at Ring C office in 20 minutes? She nodded. In the Ring C office, the air smelled of toner and coffee gone stale. Christopher sat at the narrow desk with Cal and Len present as witnesses, not spectators. Stella reported what she had overheard behind hay pallets. Exact phrasing, exact amount. 190,000 concealed insurance proceeds shifted through a bridge account under false repairs. Len stated that he had refused to release protected copies without direct cause, and that her overheard account was the cause that moved him. Christopher listened without interruption, fingers folded over the deed copy. When she finished, he stated the obstacle and the path in one clean line. You lacked admissible records. Records make removal lawful. He authorized Len in writing as retained head bookkeeper under new ownership pending immediate forensic review, and he signed a temporary directive freezing discretionary disbursements from ranch accounts until reconciliation. The papers were simple, specific, and enforceable before sunset. Stella gave Len the location of her father's old cabinet key, hidden inside the hollow base of a broken branding handle in the tack room, the one place Harlan never checked because he considered old tools beneath notice. Len left with a deputy clerk escort and returned 40 minutes later with scanned ledger copies, transfer printouts, and an insurance remittance entry that did not match reported books. Harlan was served before dark with notice of immediate removal from operational premises pending breach hearing, and the hearing date arrived faster than he expected because documentary evidence removed room for delay. He attempted the same tone he used at home, dismissive, paternal, mildly injured, and it failed under fluorescent county lights where signatures mattered more than status. The management clause that had shielded him expired with foreclosure, and concealed insurance funds constituted a fiduciary breach, documented by ledger trails and remittance timing. Mara sat beside him in a pressed jacket and did not speak when the order issued. Stella drove back to the ranch that night in a truck with one tail light out and legal copies on the passenger seat. She expected to cry once she reached the long east fence where her father used to stop for weather checks, and no tears came. Her body had chosen function again. She fed 2 late colts, checked gate chains, and set out morning rations before midnight because routine was the only thing that made land feel inhabited when authority shifted. In the house, Harlan and Mara moved through drawers with hard motions, taking framed photos that had never included Stella even when she lived under the same roof. Mara paused at the doorway with a garment bag over one shoulder. Enjoy your promotion, she said. He bought dirt, not you. Stella folded a stack of inventory tags and placed them into the desk tray. Road is clear at the north gate, she answered. Mara waited for argument, got logistics and left in a rush of perfume and resentment. Harlan took longer. He stood in the hall as if expecting Stella to ask for terms, forgiveness, explanation, any script where he retained centrality. She did not ask. He left after midnight when the deputy returned to verify compliance with the notice. Saturday arrived with the bet still standing. Christopher had not rescinded it, and Stella did not request that he do so. At 6 a.m, she reported to the temporary stall line behind Ring C in work gloves and clean denim, signed the volunteer sheet for unpaid labour, and began mucking and water resets beside 2 hired hands who had no idea she had once managed those grounds as consignor staff. The paint mare's transfer had finalised there the day before, and working that same line made the lost bet tangible in every bucket she lifted. Christopher arrived 15 minutes later, checked mare transfer documents and handed her a wheelbarrow without comment. She took it and kept moving. The first hours were mostly physical, and physical work lowered the static in her chest. By 8:30 she had reset 12 stalls, cleaned tack hooks, and rebuilt a broken latch with baling wire and a spare pin. Christopher observed from the aisle more than he spoke. When he did speak, he asked direct, practical questions. How many days of hay left at South Storage if no new delivery arrives? 4 if rationed, 3 if weather shifts wet. Which wells need immediate service? West 2 and Creek Line backup. He wrote each answer in a notebook with no visible impatience. Near noon, he asked her to walk with him to the mare pen. The paint mare had settled, ears forward, lead rope slack in Christopher's hand. You warned me not to bid theatre, he said. You were right about the room, wrong about my capacity. Stella looked at the mare's shoulder where white coat met chestnut in a clean edge. I read your jacket and your envelope. I read wrong. He gave a short nod. I stayed unknown to test what people did when there was no upside, and it cost me plain conversation that first day. She did not pretend the sentence did not sting. Tests are easier for the person who writes them, she said. He accepted that, without defense. Concealment cost me clear conversations, he answered. It gave me one clear thing. People who were decent when they believed there was no upside. Stella tightened the mare's halter buckle 1 notch, unnecessary, just enough to keep her hands occupied. You already decided who I was before you told me your name. I decided you noticed value without rank, he said. That is rare in rooms built on rank. She looked at him then, at the steadiness that no longer read as anonymity, and felt the first cautious shape of trust form where shock had been. The weekend created repeated proximity without performance. They checked water lines at dawn, reviewed feed invoices in the office trailer at noon, and walked perimeter fencing at dusk while temporary lights flickered on around emptying sale grounds. Each interaction resolved one practical question and opened another personal uncertainty she could not yet name. Christopher never asked for confession, never offered grand assurances, and that restraint made his presence feel less like rescue and more like structure. Stella noticed he read every page before signing and corrected his own arithmetic aloud when totals looked too neat. On Sunday afternoon, Len arrived with a banker box and the expression of a man carrying both evidence and relief. He laid out reconciled summaries on the trailer desk where Stella and Christopher stood. The concealed insurance proceeds totaled $190,000, remitted to ranch accounts during winter, then diverted through a bridge account under fabricated equipment repair entries. No corresponding repair invoices existed. Harlan had used Stella's feed transfer initials on unrelated dates, to create a false narrative of mismanagement. Len tapped the final page with one finger. This is enough for permanent removal and civil recovery. Stella sat down because her knees finally asked for permission they had not requested all week. She had known the truth by overhearing, but seeing it on paper changed anguish into evidence, and evidence could move institutions that ignored pain. Christopher slid a glass of water toward her without comment, then spoke to Len about filing order, service deadlines, and which copies went to county council versus lender archive. The conversation stayed procedural, and that procedural tone gave Stella room to breathe. She had spent 2 years being told she was the reason numbers failed. Numbers now named the breach correctly. By Monday morning, deputies posted the final eviction notice at the ranch house and supervised the departure of remaining personal property tied to Harlan and Mare. The physical scene was quiet, almost ordinary. Trucks loading boxes, closet rods emptied, one broken lamp wrapped in a towel. And ordinary made it harsher because collapse rarely looked cinematic in real life. It looked like paperwork attached to doors and neighbors, pretending not to stare from slow-moving pickups. Stella fed the heifers through the whole process, counting scoops twice because her concentration still fractured when voices rose near the porch. 3 days later, Christopher asked Stella to meet in the old dining room that had been used as an office under Harlan. Len was present with a folder, Cal attended as witness by request, and the county notary set out stamp and ledger on the sideboard. Christopher placed a typed agreement in front of Stella and summarized terms in plain language. She would serve as operating partner and legal resident manager of Morrison Ranch, under a 5-year operating agreement. Profit share was set at 22% of net operating profit, with salary, housing rights, and decision authority defined by scope rather than mood. Stella read every line twice, asked 3 specific questions about drought contingency, capital reinvestment thresholds, and independent audit rights, and watched Christopher answer each without impatience. The agreement required her to build quarterly reporting systems with Len and implement a pasture recovery plan before expanding breeding numbers. It also included an explicit clause that no family relation could supersede written operational authority. That sentence, dry as gravel, felt like air entering a room sealed too long. She signed where marked, hand steady, and the notary stamped the page with a flat thud that sounded nothing like victory and everything like permanence. After signatures, Cal cleared his throat and gave Stella a look halfway between pride and professional distance. "You showed up to every hard room this week," he said. "Not everyone does." She thanked him because the statement was factual and did not demand emotion she still could not spend publicly. Len gathered copies into labelled envelopes with the same care he used when handling feed invoices, and Christopher waited until the others stepped outside before speaking again. "Your father's maps are still in the West Cabinet," he said. "I did not move them." Stella nodded once, throat tight for the first time in days. Work resumed in a new pattern that still felt fragile. Stella started mornings with pasture checks across the full 1,920 acres, now carrying authority that matched responsibility. She and Len restructured vendor schedules to prevent the feast or famine ordering Harlan had favored for appearance. Christopher remained on site longer than expected, reviewing infrastructure and meeting neighboring operators. Yet he kept his interactions with Stella grounded in tasks, not declarations. Their trust expanded through repeated competence, fence repairs completed on time, a well pump replaced before failure, payroll corrected without delay, and each solved issue made the next conversation less guarded. One evening near sundown, Stella found him by the north pasture gate, where the light turned dust gold and cattle moved as a single patient body toward water. He was reading the old survey map she had mentioned, the one her father annotated in pencil with notes on winter windbreaks. He planned in long lines, Christopher said, handing the map back. Stella traced one note with her thumb. He trusted seasons more than markets. Christopher rested his forearms on the gate rail. Seasons still matter. Markets only decide who listens. She let the silence sit between them. No rush to fill it. She understood by then that his reserve was not indifference. It was discipline learned in rooms where revelation was currency. He understood that her quiet was not passivity. It was an ethics of action built under pressure where speeches solved nothing. They did not name this understanding in ornate language. They lived it in daily choices. He asked her opinion before approving capital repairs. She questioned his assumptions when weather data contradicted initial plans. Disagreement stayed respectful and specific, and that specificity became intimacy of a kind she trusted more than easy tenderness. The county breach hearing concluded in their favor 2 weeks later, with a formal finding that Harlan had concealed and misapplied $190,000 in insurance proceeds while acting under temporary authority. Civil recovery proceedings began, and his claim to any managerial role at Morrison Ranch ended permanently. Mare did not appear in person for the final filing. The status hierarchy that had governed Stella's daily life dissolved on paper first, then in community behavior, feed suppliers calling her directly, neighboring ranchers requesting her on planning calls, bank officers using her title without hesitation. Justice arrived bureaucratically, which suited her. The paint mare remained with Christopher's program for that season, and he invited Stella to review training progress whenever schedules aligned. She visited one afternoon after rain, boots damp, hair pinned back with a pencil, and watched the mare move through a calm pattern that emphasized balance over show. Christopher stood beside her at the rail, close enough for shared commentary, far enough to keep choice intact. "She settled faster than expected," he said. Stella smiled slightly. "She likes handlers who mean what they ask." He looked at her, then at the mare. "That applies in more places than barns." By late summer, the ranch books showed stability for the first time in years. No miracle, no overnight wealth, just disciplined recovery. The foreclosure price of $2,480,000 remained a hard fact in every strategic meeting, and Christopher treated it as an obligation to justify through stewardship, not extraction. Stella built operational dashboards with Len, reworked grazing rotation to reduce feed purchases, and negotiated veterinary contracts with transparent terms. Every practical improvement pushed memory of the auction day farther back, without erasing it. And she did not want erasure. She wanted a life where memory informed, not controlled. 1 month after signing, she stood in the former front parlor, now converted into a planning room, while contractors removed decorative shelves Mare had installed for staged photos and replaced them with filing cabinets and map boards. The change was humble and exact, function over display, and Stella felt an unexpected tenderness toward the room because it finally matched what work required. Christopher entered carrying 2 coffees, set one beside her elbow, and pointed to a blank board section. "Your drought trigger thresholds go there," he said. "I want them visible before winter." She nodded and reached for a marker. Their relationship unfolded inside this practical architecture. No dramatic declarations in public corridors, no performative distance either. One evening, after reviewing pump replacement bids, he asked whether she still felt anger about the auction test. She considered before answering. "I felt used for 1 day, she said. "I felt seen every day after." He accepted the distinction. "I would change the first day if I could keep the second." She met his eyes and chose honesty over caution. "Keep the second." The sentence was quiet, and it altered the room more than any speech could have. Autumn sharpened the air. Stella rode the east boundary at first light, checked repaired fencing, and returned to the house through the cottonwoods where leaves gathered in yellow drifts against the porch steps. The house was legally hers to occupy under contract now, not tolerated under someone else's mood, and the difference expressed itself in small freedoms. Boots by the door without comment. Her father's photo restored to the mantel. Ledger boxes arranged by year where she could reach them. Authority arrived as stillness, not noise. She no longer rehearsed defensive sentences while working. The final image of that season settled on an ordinary evening. Stella stood in the west pasture, clipboard tucked under her arm, while cattle moved toward feedlines she had planned, financed, and protected through choices that cost her before they rewarded her. Christopher walked up from the lower gate with Len a few steps behind, all three of them carrying different parts of the same future: ownership, operations, records, aligned for the first time. No one needed to announce victory. The wind carried hay dust and distant hoof sounds, and Stella remained exactly where she belonged, not as someone rescued, as someone recognized.